What's up, y'all? It's your boy Scooty Boots in the lab today, about to cook up a new beat, much like the one that you see playing here. I make my own background music for my YouTube videos. They're real simple, real basic, crank them out in a hurry kind of things. Because of that, I thought they'd serve as a good tutorial for the beginner musician, beginner composer, songwriter, and beginner digital music producer. I make my music in Reaper usually, so that's what we'll be working in today. So I'm going to show you how to use simple free VSTs to cook up a little simple beat in Reaper. Let's get started. Okay, so inside your DAW or your digital audio workstation, like Reaper or whatever you use, where you're actually going to be making all your music, you're going to be using these things called VST plugins, and these are virtual synthesizer type of things. So anything that you don't record in your DAW with a microphone or with audio coming from some kind of external hardware thing, when you're going to be using virtual synthesizers inside of your DAW, you're going to be using plugins. And plugins are how you get things like virtual instruments as well as virtual effects like reverb and delay and distortion and other things like that onto a track in your DAW. There's a ton of free VSTs out there. I've just done a search for best free VST piano and watched some videos and then make a list of ones you want to try to grab. And then there's also websites like this one, Plugins for Free, where you can go find a bunch of different plugins in one place. And a lot of these and the other ones will make you set up an account, give your email, and go do a verification through the email. And some of the more complicated ones have their own software package that they run, so you have to download their software and then download the plugins, which will run inside of their software as a plugin inside of your DAW. So for now, I'm just looking for easy VST file plugins. So I'm on the site Plugins for Free, and I'm looking for something that's not going to make me create an account, just to give you a demo here. And this one looks like it's going to let me download a zip file. So I'm going to download the zip file, and you just want to make sure that you're clicking on a actual link for the VST and not an ad or some other kind of shady thing. So when that's done, I can come over to my downloads folder, and here's the zip file, and it should be in there. And then you can see the zip file there, so I'm going to right click on it, hit extract all. It's going to make a new folder, and then it's going to show the files when complete. So that's all good. I'll extract it. Okay, so now it's done. So now in this folder, I've got this DLL file and then this instruments folder. So I'm going to click and drag and copy both of these, click and drag and Control C, and then I'm going to go to my C drive, and under Program Files, VST Plugins, I'm going to paste that and hit OK on Admin Privs. Now that's in this folder, C drive, Program Files, VST Plugins. So now I'm going to go to Reaper. I'm going to make a new project. So I'm just going to say New Project. I'm not going to save this other thing I had open. So I'm just going to start from a blank slate here. So I'm going to double click to make a new track. You can also go Insert or Track, Insert New Track, or Control T as it says there. And I need to go to my preferences here. So I'm going to go to Options, Preferences. You can also hit Control P. And then over here under VST, I'm going to hit Edit File or Edit Path List. And I'm going to make sure that C Program Files VST Plugins folder is listed in here. And if not, you can go to Add Path and find it and select it and add it. And so once that file path is included in places that it looks for VSTs, then I'm going to hit this Rescan button right here and say Rescan Paths for New or Modified. So it's going to rescan all those folders, so it should see it now. So then I'll hit OK. And then we can go add effects to our new track. And I'll do a search for piano. And there it is, VST City Piano. Double click that. And there it is. So now the piano VST that we have installed now shows up as a plugin under the effects section of this track. And I should be able to click on here and get audio. There we go. Now to be able to control this with my keyboard, my MIDI controller here, I'm going to mute that first. And then I'm going to come here to Inputs. I'm going to change my input to Input MIDI, Oxygen Pro, which is my device that I use, and then just all channels. And then once I have that selected, I can hit Record Arm, make sure nothing crazy comes up there, and then hit some keys. You can see that it lights up in response to when I hit the keys. So I'll go ahead and unmute this and hear this piano. There we go, it's there. All right, now I've played around on the piano for a few minutes here and worked out a idea for the core, basic chord progression of what I'm going to make here. What I'm shooting for is a nice glide beat, kind of a chill beat to ride to. And so what I've structured out here, let me show you from the basics, is I'm going to be operating in an E minor scale. I learned music on guitar, so I think in E usually. Except I'm using an E minor here, which is actually the relative minor of G major. So what we're actually doing is we're taking the G major scale which has the one black key in it, the F sharp, and we're going to go down to what's called its relative minor, which is the 6. So if I start on G is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 is an E, but I'm going to throw this down an octave, down here, same note. I'm going to jump him down here, and using the same notes from the G major scale, we're going to get the E minor scale. The G major scale, its relative minor is the E minor, so the E minor is going to use all the same notes as the G major scale, except it's going to start on E. There's our 1 sharp. So now we're in the key of E minor. We went from G major to its relative minor of E. And the easy way to think about that, if you're just looking at the piano, is it's 3 keys down anywhere you go. So just keeping it simple, our key here is E minor, and I'm going to start the song on the 1, the E minor. So E is the 1 note in our scale, and we get our triads just by stacking up thirds from the notes in that scale. So if we go 1, 2, 3, and then 3, 4, 5, the 1, the 3, and the 5 from where your root starts on is your triad. And in this case it forms out because we have a whole step and then a half step right here instead of 2 whole steps to make a major. It's an E minor. Now my next chord, I'm going to jump down to C as my root, and C is going to be the 6th chord, because if I start at the 1, which is E, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, C is the 6th, but I'm going to throw this down an octave, and I'm going to build a triad off of that. So if C is my 1, if I continue up that scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, from C, the 1, 3, and 5 there is a C major. And this 1 minor to 6 major chord progression is an extremely popular chord progression that's a million songs. Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. Okay, except instead of a simple triad to triad, I'm going to add a little coloring tone on top of what's happening here. I'm going to add the 7 in, and instead of this being a E minor, I'm going to make it an E minor 7, because the 7 is the 7th note in the scale there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that 7 on top, that's an E minor 7. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this D note ringing out as we go to our next chord, that C major. And that creates a little bit extra mood, a little bit more of a kind of contemplativeness to it, and it adds a little something, maybe a little hope on top of our old-fashioned 1 to 6 doom and gloom chord progression here. We've got this kind of mellowed 7 hanging out on top of the E, who then becomes this sort of hopeful suspended note hanging out on top of this downward chord movement. And so what it's doing, the D is now in relation to this C major chord that we've got. And so what the C is our 1, the D is the 2, 1, 2. Or if it's up here, we could call it the 9, because if we went up the scale like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, instead of saying we're back to 1, we could keep going and say 7, 7, 8, 9. So the 2 down here, if we kept it going up here, would be a 9. So we can call this a C major add 9, or maybe a C major suspended 2, because it's like a suspended 2 that never resolves. And it has the same feel, kind of, as the much more popular suspension, the 4-3 suspension. So if I'm on this C chord still, and I take 3 up to 4 and do this resolution, that's a much more common suspension and resolution. The 2 is kind of a much softer version of that. So with my C major chord down here, and this D as the 2 or 9, whatever you want to call it, lingering up on top, it adds a little hope, it adds a little floatiness. And now from here I want to keep it simple again, and I feel like this just really wants to go to A. So we went from 1 E to 6, the C, and now I'm going down to A. And A is the 4. If I jump this up an octave, remember we go up our scale starting at E, 1, 2, 3, 4. So A is our 4 chord. So what kind of chord triad evolves out of this? Well, using the notes from the scale, we go 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. And that forms the A minor. If we were in a key where we had to put a black key here, then we'd get an A major out of this. But because we're in E minor, the 4 that evolves from that, using those scale degrees, is the 4 minor. And because the actual voicing, remember I started by hitting these keys, and then my D hung out up here, while my triad moved down to a C. So I don't want to jump this all the way down to super doom and gloom down here. That's quite a jump for your hand to make, and also it's too much of a shift in mood for what this vibe is supposed to be. So I'm going to voice this A minor very differently. Instead of this powerful doomy root note at the bottom, I'm going to throw this up an octave. And now the bottom of this chord is the C, the 3rd. So this is what's called first inversion. I've taken the root note, so my chord going 1, 3, 5, I've thrown that 1 up on top. Now it's in first inversion, which makes my bottom note the 3. And that's got a slightly different mood. And so with this high D that we had up here, he was pretty hopeful. What are we going to do with him? Well, let's let him just resolve back and double up the 3rd of this A. Because I don't want this D to just drone on the whole time, and I want to keep it simple, going back to just triads here with an A minor. So that's kind of nice there. This D from our E to our C, he's going to resolve nicely into just a natural A minor, or the 4 chord. And then from 4, just keeping it real simple, we're going to go up to 5. And 5 will be our last chord in the chord progression, and the reason I picked 5 is because that's the most common way to resolve back to our 1. And the 5 is what's known as the dominant. So the dominant resolves back, the dominant or the 5 resolves back to the tonic, or it builds tension that feels like it wants to resolve back to your tonic. And so we're not going to do anything fancy and do any kind of variations on that. We're going to stick with the good old 5 chord to resolve back to our 1. So with this 5 here, I need to build a triad on top of this and get a chord out of it. So if I go starting here within our scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, my 1, 3, and 5 give me a B minor chord. And that's not going to build as much tension as a major chord to resolve back to the 1. But that's not really what I want here. I'm just going to let it stay within our normal E minor scale that we're operating in. And the 5 chord you get out of that is a B minor. The chords are E minor, C major, A minor, B minor. But you don't have to say all that if you just say it's in the key of E minor, and the chords are 1, 6, 4, 5. Now, if I wanted to, in some cases, I would make this a B major. And to do that, all I would have to do is take this D that's normally in the scale and raise it up a half step. But that's not in the E natural minor scale that we're operating in. And this is, as an aside, this is why it's so important to study music theory and to learn and understand music theory. A lot of people are intimidated by learning it, but it's really simple. I mean, it's really just scales and modes, which is just more scales. And scales is just 7 notes and sometimes just 5 notes. So you have a structure of 7 notes or sometimes even just 5 notes. And from that, you build your chords, your chord progressions, your melodies, your shredding guitar solos, whatever you're going to do, it all builds off of these 7-note structures usually. And those are just your scales. And just as you use letters to put together words, to put together sentences, to express yourself, you use certain scales that you pick, from which come chords, from which come chord progressions and melodies that you selectively choose to express whatever you're trying to express. If you don't really know your music theory, then you're just feeling around in the dark for things that sound good. And you're not really expressing your will through your craft. And when you're not able to express yourself clearly or accurately, you don't elicit quite the response that you want. And you don't express yourself accurately, so some frustration will always remain inside of you. You have to be familiar with the tools of your craft to express yourself through your craft. So with music, it's just scales. Everything comes from that. So if I did want to jump this up from a B minor to a B major and get an even more dominant, powerful 5 to resolve to a 1, and that's more common in like classical music and other things like that, movie music where you're going for a lot more drama, make this 5 a major. And what you're actually doing when you make that adjustment is you're just switching for this one chord, briefly for just this one chord in your chord progression, you're switching from being in the natural minor scale, the E natural minor scale, and you're modulating to what's called the E harmonic scale, harmonic minor scale. So the E natural minor scale that we've been using, 5, 6, 7, 1, is just that, the one black key that comes from its relative major, the G, right, where we started on. Then what's called the harmonic minor is when we just take the 7 and we raise it up 1/2 step. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 in the natural minor, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 in the harmonic minor scale. So going from the 6 to the 7, you have this much more dramatic jump here. You have a minor third interval. And then just this little 1/2 step resolution, this 1/2 step away resolution is what creates that drama, that pull to come back to 1 even stronger. And so if you wanted to, that's what you could do. You could, instead of staying within the natural minor for your 5 dominant chord to resolve back to the 1, you could modulate there to the harmonic minor key just for that chord, so you could pull out this major chord here, and then you just go back to your normal minor. But that's a lot more powerful and bold than what I'm looking for here, so I'm just going to leave that as the 5 minor. But I'm not going to voice it like this either. So our A, we left off up here. We started with this A minor, a 1, 3, 5. We threw the 1 up on top, and that made it a first inversion, because now our third note is in the third of A minor is in the bottom, and give a little more strength to that slightly less gloomy feeling of the A minor by voicing it this way, and by letting our high note suspended from earlier resolve back down to where he wanted to in that C note, but we didn't let him. We didn't let it resolve back all the way. He's resolving back into a minor. He's still there, but he had to resolve back to a minor. So his hopefulness is paid off, kind of. All right, so then from my A, voiced like this, I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'm going to go to the 5. But I'm not going to voice it like this either. Remember, our previous voicing was this on that A minor. So you really just want to usually go to wherever's closest. So I'm going to let this C come down to a B. And this E come up to that F sharp, the one black key. And that gives us our 1 and our 5 from our B minor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, and 5 is the triad. Down here, we're just going to block out the 1 and 5, which is pretty common. That's kind of the most common thing to do, because it gives that powerful structure at the base that outlines and tells you what the root of the chord is here, and then we can do other fluffy things on top. But in this case, we're just going to repeat the root so that our A from the previous chord is just going to come up to this B and repeat the root. And the C, our hopeful guy from earlier, is going to resolve back up to where he was. So he's made it, he's survived, and his hopefulness is paid off. Kind of, because he's back in a minor chord now. But then he's going to go back to 1 and start it all over again. So you can see it's not a super powerful, bold, emotional, dramatic kind of motion. It's more of a thoughtful, contemplative, pensive kind of thing. So now our overall chord progression is going to go like this. So I just did that to show you what I was doing on the keys with this piano here. I don't actually want to keep this piano sound. I just wanted to use that to show you how to download a simple VST. So what I'm going to do is, to get rid of this, I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to hit the delete key. And then I'm going to double click inside this blank space and bring up my plugin selector here. And I'm going to clear out my search from earlier. And I'm going to go down to this instruments category filter. And you can see I've downloaded a bunch of stuff that I need to try out. I'm going to try this hybrid air. This thing's pretty cool, I think. So I double click that, and now that shows up as the instrument that I have on here. And so now I still have my MIDI as my input, right? And I still have it record armed. So I should be able to hear it just by hitting the keyboard. But this has, you can see a whole bunch of stuff you can adjust. And if I wasn't just making a simple background music type of thing, I would fine tune everything to my liking. But for just quick and dirty work here, I'm going to go through the presets. And this thing offers a lot of presets here. So I'm going to go to this soft pads section and start to click through some of these soft pad presets. That's a little bit more like what I'm looking for. No, that's more like what I'm looking for. It's a little spacey. That's adding other notes. That's what I want. That's more like the dreamy, spacey vibe we're going for here. So let me try that chord progression in here. Here's our E minor 7 to our C major sus2 or add 9 to our A minor to our B minor, and then back to our 1. So that's more like what I'm looking for there. But I'm actually going to set this aside for a minute. I'm going to unarm that so nothing from my keyboard comes through, because I want to work on drums for a second. Okay, so I went back to my internet browser and actually decided to get a plugin called Beat Drummer from kvraudio.com. You can get it other places, but I found it here and found this download link. Again, make sure you're not clicking ads or some other shady stuff. But I click that link and it's downloading another zip file, so I'm waiting for this zip file to download. So that's done. I'm going to go back to my downloads folder, find it in there. There's the zip file. I'm going to right click on it, extract it to a new folder, show extracted files when done. Now it's finished extracting and made a new folder for it. So I'm going to come in here. There's a bunch of stuff. I just want the VST64 plugins. So I'm going to go in that folder, click and drag to highlight that stuff. This is a big file, so I'm going to Control X to cut. I'm going to go back to my C program files, VST plugins, and Control V to paste into there. And now if I go back to Reaper, if I just hit Control P, I can bring up preferences again. I'm still in my VST sections, and we already mapped that folder, so I'm just going to hit rescan for new and modified. Now hit OK. That's done. So now if I bring up my VST on here, I search for DRMR. There it is, Beat Drummer, DRMR. And double click that, and there it is. There's Beat Drummer. So I can click in here, and we get some sounds. And this sounds like an 808. I can see in the preferences, or the presets here, it's an 808 here. You got a lot of presets in here. So we could play around in here all day. I'm just going to find something quick. And so I'm going to record arm this track so that I can play this with my keyboard. All right, so I played around in here, some different presets, and I figured out what I want to do. Again, you can play around with all the settings in here to your heart's content till you tweak things exactly how you want them. I'm just doing things quick and dirty, just using presets as they are. So what I actually want to do is lay this out like you would a normal drum kit if you were recording it, and have drum on each track instead of having everything combined on one, because then you're much more confined as to what you can do. And I want to use sounds from different kits, and there might be a way to go in here and make custom kits, but I'm not even going to mess with that. I'm going to try to do something else here. And down here at BPM, I have this, it's at 115 right now. I don't actually want that. It's going to be quite a bit too fast for this, so I'm just going to throw it down at like, I don't know, 95. So what I'm going to do is, first let me unarm this, and I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to right click on that and duplicate it again. So now I've got this exact same thing on here, but I'm going to make these separate. So I'm going to click inside of here, double click in there, and I'm going to give this a name. This is going to be my kick drum track. This is going to be my snare drum. And this is going to be my hi-hat. Or actually, I'll call it hi-hat 1 because there's probably going to be more stuff like that going on. Close this effects window. And I'm going to bring up the FX window for the kick. And I'm going to make sure it says kick up here, that I'm on the right one. And so I want I have to record arm this. There we go. I want the kick drum from this guy. So that's all I'm going to use here. And I'm going to unarm that. And then I'm going to go to my snare track and I'm going to arm that. And I'm going to bring up the effects window for that, and I'm going to make sure it says snare up here in the corner. And I'm going to go to a different kit that I wanted to use for that. And there's these two snares here. Sound all right together, so I'm actually going to use these two from this kit as just my snare on this track. And now I'm just going to close these. I'm going to unarm that, and then I'm going to arm my hi-hat track. And then I'm going to bring up the effects window on that, and I'm going to get my hi-hats from another preset that I found where I like the hi-hats. So that's just going to be the hi-hat track. Okay, so now I can unarm that. I could record and start to try to play it in time with the metronome and things like that, but what I'm actually going to do just to keep it easy is just make sure that I'm clicked inside of this kick track. I'm going to click inside of this space here. I'm going to hit W to go back to 0. W takes you back to the beginning. Check out John Tidy's Reaper blog videos for lots of time-saving, shortcutty stuff like that. From here, you can see we've got our grid showing up here, and that's coming from this button right there. That's showing us our grid lines right here that match up to our tempo that we've laid out here. So I've got this just at 95 beats per minute. I'll adjust it from there. And you can see these markers here up top on the timeline. It says 1, 3, 5. Those are your bars. So right before 3 here, this section now, I'm going to click and drag in this timeline. And you see it highlighted this thing. That's now a time selection. So I've made a time selection of 2 bars. And so I'm still clicked on this click track 2. So I'm going to go insert new MIDI item. And now it's going to make a new MIDI item inside of this track that is the length of the time selection that I gave it. And to get rid of this time selection, you just hit the escape key. And now I can double click this MIDI item. And here I get my MIDI roll, where I can start to lay out my stuff. Okay, so I can close that for a second. And the cool thing about Reaper is that, unlike other DAWs, you don't have to select whether you're making a mono track or a stereo audio track or a MIDI track or a VST instrument track or whatever. In Reaper, a track is a track is a track. There's one kind of track, and it doesn't become any kind of a track until you do something to it. So if you have a track and you set your input to be a mono audio input signal from your interface and you record onto that, well, then that's just a single audio track now. And here on this other track where I've dumped a MIDI item and I'm going to start putting MIDI information, this has now become a MIDI track. All right, so now that I got that, I'm going to click on that, hit Control-C to copy it, click down in this next track, the snare track, hit W to go back to start, and then Control-V to paste in there. And then do the same thing on the next track. So now I've got 3 empty MIDI items that are 2 bars long that I'm going to use to create my kick, snare, and hi-hat pattern. So I'm going to double click on this MIDI item for the kick. I'm going to find that kick that I was looking for. I'm going to have to come back and record arm this to get that to work. And that's this guy right here. So I'm just going to start, I double click right there to draw a note. And by default, it's just going to draw it here to whatever this grid length is set to, 16th notes, and that's fine. Right here, I could change that if I wanted to. And then I'm going to have another kick on 3 right here. You can see where it says 1, 2, 3, 4. And that wasn't actually right in there. That's on the 3 there. I'm going to do the same thing on the next bar for 2 on the 1, the downbeat of the 2, draw one right there, and again on the 3. So now if I hit W and play that, okay, we'll come back and change that later, but that's going to frame out the time. Now I'm going to come back into my snare over here, and you can probably guess I'm going to get the snares that I wanted. Oh, I've got to close this and unarm this, and now arm this one. I can come back in here, and there's the 2 snares that I wanted, and those are going to hit on, drag that down to the one I want. Those are going to hit on 2 and 4. So what I can also do here is I can just click, right click, hold down right click and drag to draw a box and get those 2. And I'll just Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and drag that out. All right, and then likewise I can draw another one, right click and drag and select that. And another thing I can do, instead of copy and paste, you can hit Control D to duplicate. And that just duplicated that right across from there where I wanted it. So now let's hit W and listen to both of those. Okay, so I'll close that. And now that I've got some stuff going on here, I should really save this. So I'm going to give this project name. I'm going to say save project as, because this is a new project. I'm going to come into my Reaper stuff here. I've got this organized in a certain way. I'm just going to make a new folder inside of my Reaper Media projects and call it Beat Demo Video. And I'm going to highlight that name, copy that, click out of there, double click to select that new folder I made. I'm going to paste what I copied earlier, the text Beat Demo Video, for the file name also, for the RPP file. That's the actual project file. And I'm going to leave this checked, create a subdirectory so everything's nice and organized, copy everything into there, and save. So now I've got this saved. So if I lose it, if something happens, I can open it up and Reaper should still have that saved. And I can pick up where I left off here. So I'm going to uncheck my snare and I'm going to move on to my hi-hat and check that and double click its MIDI item. And I need to find the hi-hat I was looking for, which is that guy right there. And now this is the reason I left my grid on 16ths, because I'm going to make 16th notes hi-hat hits here. Draw these in here. Then I'm going to right click, drag and draw a box. And I'm going to Control C to copy. And then I'm going to click over where I want it to go and paste it in there. And keep doing this way. Control V to paste and fill this out. So now just W to go back to start. Again, hit spacebar to play it. All right, we're going to come back and mess with this drum pattern, but we've got the kind of foundation of what it really is laid out there. So I'm going to uncheck, or I'm going to unarm that track. I'm going to come back to where we started, this hybrid air synth. I'm going to arm this so I can hear him again. And I could hit record and just play it, but I think actually I'll just draw it in there. So like I did before, I'm going to select a time selection. I'm going to click inside of this track here. And before we get started, I'll just go ahead and name it. That's going to be my, I'll just call it an airy pad. It's an airy synth pad. And a pad is like a long, like a drawn out, a thing that holds chords. So I'm going to call that airy pad. And I'm going to W to go back to start. And I'm going to go insert new MIDI item. And there's a new 2-bar long MIDI item. Now I'll hit escape to get rid of my time selection. Double click in there. I'm going to start just by drawing them out instead of playing them. So I've got my E there. I'll draw that out for like half a bar. See what that does. Okay, so now I've got my E, G, B, and D drawn in there. There's my E minor 7th chord. And this velocity here is probably a bit more than I want actually. So I'm going to select all of those notes. I'm going to right click and drag to select all those notes down here in the velocity section. I'm going to pull that all down just a little bit. So it's not hitting all the way. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, so now that I've got that highlighted, I'm just going to Control C to copy. And I'm going to click in the next section where I want it to go. And just adjust these notes to where they're supposed to be. So from this E, this guy jumps down to the C. This G jumps down to the E. B jumps down to a G. And I could actually just move that other one down. This is all the same. Because our triad was the C, E, G. Now for the C major with the D lingering on top. So now listen to both of those. but that's going too fast. So what we need to do is right click, select those, and move these over in time to where they're supposed to be. And that's fine. What I can do now out here to get the rest of my chord progression in here, so you can right click and drag and select all this stuff, and Control D to duplicate it. So now that's all the same. And I can click back in this second one that I just made to get the last two chords, which is going to be the A minor, and then we need to make this one the B minor. So now what I can do is click and drag this whole 4-bar section to create a time selection there. And in my transport here, I can hit the loop button and make sure that's highlighted. So now that I've got that, I'm going to unarm that for a second. And if I don't want to have these two sections, I can highlight one and then Control click to highlight both of them, highlight the other one. I can right click on it, and then I can go to glue items. And that's going to turn them into one MIDI item. So now if I double click, let me close this FX window. If I double click on this glued item, it opens up with my 4-chord progression there. I don't have to open up these two separate things anymore. But I kind of want all of these to extend a little bit longer, to sustain a little longer. So again, I'm going to right click and draw, right click and drag and draw a box, and come down till it makes this little shape here, this little extend the end looking shape. And because I have it selected, I'll be able to extend all of these notes that I have selected. And I'm going to try it with a much shorter gap before the next chord. You see now those are sustaining a little too long. I could go back in the plugin and adjust the decay and sustain settings of the plugin, but I think I'll just shorten these notes up here because it's kind of close, and we'll try it like that. And that's more like what I'm looking for. So it just cuts off for the last quarter note. It stops right at the 4 of each bar. So I've kind of got that set. I'm going to leave that alone, close that for now. I'm going to Control S to save my progress here. And I'm going to drag this airy pad track down here below these other guys. And you have to be careful, because if you accidentally drag it to the side like that, where it's kind of indented inside of the other one, that means this one is routed through that one. So like if I mute this one, it'll also mute this thing. And if I pull this volume down, it'll also pull this volume down, because this thing is kind of like nested inside of here. So what's happening in here gets routed through this parent folder. It's like this thing is inside of this guy's folder, sort of. So if I want to get him out of there, you need to make sure that you click and drag him to where he's fully extended like all the other tracks, like he's a main track. But I want him down on the bottom, because usually how I want things laid out is drums, bass, instruments, vocals from top to bottom. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is once you start getting some tracks, you can right click on a track and go to track color, set track to custom color, and pick colors for your different tracks. And you can also pick icons for your different tracks. If you right click on a track and set track icon, you can come in here and see what different icons you have available. And you can also go download other ones, and that icon will show up in there. So you can go ahead and put colors and icons to all your tracks. Once you start getting numerous tracks, it'll be a lot easier to help visually identify them. Alright, so I've taken a minute to color code and set icons for each of my tracks, and I've also actually gone into that original kick MIDI pattern that we had there and made that a little more interesting instead of just that solid downbeat that we started with to set the time. And another thing that I did is made pretty minor adjustments to the mix overall, making adjustments to each track using the volume knob on the track or using the fader in the mix window. So I think I've got a good balance now between the kick, snare, and hat and that airy pad that we created. Alright, so I got this thing into BPM. I like it. It's at 92. Got everything glued together to a 4-bar pattern that repeats here. Got kind of these balances set okay. And I want to get another pad to beef up and back up this single pad that we have going on here. So what I'm actually going to do is just duplicate this whole track, because it's actually going to play the exact same MIDI part. I'm just going to select a different patch or a different preset or patch, same thing. So I'm going to mute that original one because I don't want to hear that. I just want to hear something else that I'm going to pair with that. And I need to record arm that if I'm going to hear it from my keyboard. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for there. So let me see how that sounds on its own. I like that. Let me turn that up quite a bit though, because that's a much softer sound. Because that's more of a string, it cuts out earlier than I want it to. So this one I'm going to right click and drag to select all these notes. I get this little extender icon looking thing. And I'm going to drag that out till just 1/16th note rest in between the chord changes there. We'll see how this sounds. Yeah, maybe an 8th note. That's a bit much. Try an 8th note rest. Yeah. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute that original one. I don't need this record armed anymore. And I'm going to name this duplicated track that I made Airy Pad 2, which would make this guy now Airy Pad 1. I'm going to pan these. So with this knob here on the track where it says pan, or this knob down here, it's the same thing on the mixer. I'm going to pan this Airy Pad left 25%. I'm going to pan this other synthy pad right 25%. I'm going to bring the volume down for both of these and cue just my drums. I'm going to mix in my first pad that leans to the left now. I'm going to bring in my other pad that leans to the right now. We should have a little bit wider, fuller sound. There we go. Okay, so these drums are really needing some reverb. So what I'm going to try to do here is I want to put one after this hi-hat here. I'm going to right click, I'm going to say insert new track. And I'm going to title this drum verb for drum reverb. I'm going to color it to kind of match the drums. I'll try that. Okay, so on here, I'm going to go to effects and I'm going to search for verb. I'm going to add something called reverb. And this is Reaper's built-in reverb plugin. And I just need to route stuff to here now. So I'll start with my snare and I'm going to click this route button on snare, and where it says sends, I'm going to say add new send, and I'm going to send it to drum verb. And now our snare drum, in addition to being routed to the master send, the master track, this guy over here, and you can see I'm peaking. Just click that to get rid of that peak. We'll fix that later. You don't want your audio peaking, clipping. That's when it's going to start to distort. So if that shows up, you just click that to make that go away. And we'll make sure our levels are below that when we get a little bit further here. Because some of these sounds, they just show up as the loudest. So now with this route, our snare is being routed to this drum verb track because we added an additional send on top of the master send. And so now this drum verb is getting its input from there. So now on this drum verb guy, we're not going to leave him dry because that's just going to be a duplicate of what's already happening on the snare track, and we'll just make the snare louder. So there's one preset in here called Sweet Verbo that I have anyway, or this other one, Bad Crunch. No, I don't want that. Sweet Verbo. Okay, you can get way into these. I'm just getting started in here on a new computer with Reaper. So I'm going to unsolo that. So we want to actually pull the dry signal down all the way. We just want the wet sound. And now with just that wet sound going, and the snare and the drum verb soloed, I'm going to pull the drum verb all the way down. There's just a snare. And I'm going to mix it up so it's just barely there. Let me mute these keyboards. You can just barely hear it when we isolate the drums. But if we take that little hint of drum verb away, it makes the whole thing feel really dry. And I'm actually going to do the same thing and route the kick and hi-hat there too. So I'm going to click on the route button of the kick track, and I'm going to go add send to drum verb. And that's going to send the kick there also. And then I'll select my hi-hat track and click the route button there. And again, say add new send and send that to my drum verb. So now if I solo my drum verb track, you can hear that the kick, snare, and hat are all being sent there. I don't actually want them there in this balance because that kick is going to muddy up the low end too much. So what I'm going to do is going to go to route here, and this send, I'm going to pull the send volume down. So it's just barely there. Mainly I want that icing on the snare sound. This is just going to add just a smidge of spaciousness to the kick. And likewise on the hi-hat, I'm going to go to the route button on the hi-hat because there's a little too much on there. I'm going to pull that back. That's mostly for the snare. And there, it's just kind of barely there. It's not so much you can hear it, but your brain perceives it. Okay, so now if I unsolo that, pull my drum verb all the way down, we'll start back at dry again. Just kind of start from clean slate again. There's our dry. And I'll just barely mix in my drum verb here. There we go. That's just a little bit of spaciousness on top of there. Okay, now I'm going to unmute those pads again. And that's a little bit more like the space and feel. And I think I actually want to bring this reverb up a little bit. And bring this snare down a little bit. It's got the reverb there. It doesn't need to be quite that hot. I want it tucked back a little bit. Okay, all right, now I'm going to get rid of this mixer for a second. So I'm going to go view mixer and uncheck that. I'm just going to be working on tracks here. And then this plus and minus sign on the y-axis here can adjust the height of these tracks. And you can also do it through some scroll combination. I have a special combination set, but those buttons will do it too. And you can actually do all that stuff if you go to Actions, Show Action List. Not everything, but close to everything is in here of what you set your keyboard shortcuts to, and lots of other things in here. So you can scroll around in here and see where there are shortcuts set, and you can search for different things. But I'll just close that for now so we can roll on with this thing. And now I feel like this thing's really wanting a bass line. So I'm going to make a new track, just double click in there. I'm going to click and drag and move that up because I want that to come after my drums. And I'm going to double click in here, and I'm going to title this bass. And I'm going to right click in there because bass usually feels purple to me. Purple or deep blue. Deep purple, get it? Okay, and then I'm going to change my input to, actually that's fine. I'm going to bring up my effects, and I'm going to clear out my search term. I'm going to go to my category of instruments here, and I want to see if there's anything in this VST called Dext, which is a replica of one of the most famous synths of all time from the 80s and 90s, the Yamaha DX7. And Dext is a replica of that, and I don't really remember what was in here, but I'll just cruise through these presets. Again, arm the track. So I got to set my inputs over here to input MIDI, Oxygen Pro, all channels again, and record arm that. And we can play around in here. No, nothing there. So I'm going to highlight Dext and delete that. I'm going to try something else. Okay, so I found this bass patch I want to use in this other plugin called Surge XT. And I'm going to use this preset here, FM Bass 5. I kind of like this one. So it clipped there, so I'm going to click that red to get rid of that. And I'm still on a 2-bar time selection here, so I'm just going to select inside my bass track, hit W to go back to start, go insert, new MIDI item, and now I've got a 2-bar thing there. Double click that to open that. Find that E right there. Draw an E note in there. Go to the C, down to the A. We're just going to outline the root movement here like bass usually does. And then I'm going to work out a bass line from this foundational thing here. But this is really what's happening. So I'm going to work out a bass line in there. Okay, so now before I unsolo that, let me stop this. I'm going to unarm that. I'm going to bring the volume all the way down. Then I'll unsolo it. And then I'll play W, play from the start again, and then just mix it in till it's nice and balanced with the drums. Nobody sounds like they're too far in front of anybody else, and you've got a good presence of everything. But everything sits in its own space sonically, up and down and left and right and front and back. So because of that, I'm gonna actually roll my hi-hat, go to this panning knob here. Again, you could also use the pan knob on the mixer window, but I'm just gonna pan this hi-hat just a tad bit to the right. You don't want to move it too much, because if you move it too much, then it just becomes annoying in one ear. But moving it just slightly off center, it's going to open up space for this. Is going to open up the space for the boom clap of the kick and snare. The kick and snare are going to own this center space here. I'm going to roll my hi-hat off just like 5% right here, just to make room for the kick and snare to own the middle, because that's like the foundation. And this hi-hat is just going to be off to the side a bit, not so much that it becomes annoying in one ear. And because it's also more realistic, if you imagine yourself looking at a drummer playing a kit, an actual drum kit, you know, the hi-hat's off to the side a little bit. And so if you're looking at the drum kit, the hi-hat is going to be off to the right just a little bit. And that's called listener's perspective. Another thing you could do, you could roll it over to the left, which actually I think I will do. Sometimes I kind of prefer this. So I'm going to roll this over I'm going to pan this left. Like 5%. 5% left works. And when you pan it over to the left side, then it's what's called drummer's perspective, because instead of panning it the way that it would be if you were standing in front of a drum kit, it's panned the way if you were the drummer and you're behind the kit, so that the hi-hat's slightly to your left because the snare is in your middle. And that bass we pretty much always leave right up the middle. This drum verb is doing a stereo return, so I'm just going to leave that on its own because it's actually doing a stereo left-right on its own from that plugin. And we already panned our airy pads a little bit. Now this bass is okay, but it sounds like it needs a little help to get out of the way and own its own space. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to effects here where I had my bass, which is coming from this Surge XT plugin, and I'm gonna double click in this empty field here. I'm gonna add another plugin that's gonna come in line after this. So the sound coming out of the Surge XT plugin is then next going to be routed through what I select here. So because I've already got an instrument playing, I'm not going to select another instrument. I'm going to go make sure I'm back on this all plugins here. And I'm going to look for EQ. I'm going to just use Reaper's built-in equalizer, which is the RIA EQ right here. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to do a little EQ to this bass and adjust the frequencies so that the bass sits where bass should sit a little bit more in relation to the mix. And so back here, this is what's really awesome. You have this spectrum analyzer here. You can see where the frequency range is of this instrument as it's hitting. And it's pretty good already. I'm still picking up some highs, like it's taking up a little bit of space on the highs. So what I'm actually going to do is put a filter on that and just completely cut out high frequencies. So I'm going to put what's called a low pass filter on there. And you can see that's going to cut out everything from there. I don't actually want that though. I'm going to move this frequency, the cutoff frequency of this filter up quite a bit. And then I'm going to play. And then from the very top, I'm going to roll this down. And right around here, I kind of like it. It's just doing something barely perceptible. There's not really hardly any audio there at all, but it's cutting out everything completely and opening space for the high end of the drums, the hi-hat and the snare crack, and the high airy part of the synths. And also it's a bit muddy, it's a bit MIDI, like mid-rangey, I should say, when it's combined with this kick going on here. And that kick, I'm already okay with it pretty much. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a band pass filter, which is normally what you're gonna use. And the trick with EQ is you take away, the concept here is to take away what you don't want, to reveal the exact sound that you're looking for, that doesn't just make the instrument sound good, but makes the instrument sound how you want it to in the mix. It doesn't matter how the instrument sounds by itself. If it's going to be playing in the mix the whole time, then all that matters is how it sounds when it's in the mix. And this sounds a bit mid-bassy to me with the bass and the kick going at the same time. So mid-bassiness, I'm going to start around 200 hertz. And then I'm going to pull the gain down just a few decibels, just maybe like -3 dB. But this bandwidth by default is really wide. And as a rule, as a general rule, it's cut, narrow, and boost wide. Cut, narrow, and boost wide. So when you're cutting frequencies, you usually want to be pretty surgical with taking out the parts that are causing the problems and not making things sit where you want them to sit. If you take out too much, that's a real quick way to make things sound hollow and empty and far away. And sometimes you might want that. That's something wide like this I would use a lot more on, say, something like an effects return, like this drum verb. If I was spending more time, I might EQ this a lot more like this with some wide curves to really just contour it, because it's just going to sit in the background. But when we want to clean up our main instruments, we really want to get some tight cuts that are really precise on our problem frequencies, so that it sounds up close and in your face. So I'm just going to kind of sweep around and find where that muddiness starts to go away. It gives me the sensation on the low end that I'm looking for. Okay, so I think that's pretty close to what I'm looking for there. I'm just doing this real quick and dirty again. So around 243 hertz is kind of that boxy, mid-rangey place that I'm trying to cut out. Right around 250 in here. And so I'm scooping out about 5. Not that much. Kind of like that, just 2.5 dB, and I'll play with this Q. This is what's called the Q, the bandwidth or the Q, not to be confused with the Q of quantizing your MIDI notes to the grid. The Q is your bandwidth here. So I get that to where the bass is just a little bit clearer and tastier for my taste. Okay, and then I want to add one more, so I'm going to use this 3. I'm going to use this third. This is a 4, I don't know what you call it, 4-channel EQ here. So I'm going to go to this third one, and right around here, I think I want to scoop a little bit out. It's feeling a little bit strong right in this frequency range. And the bass is supposed to sit in the back, and this right around 1K. When you're right in the middle here, around 1K, this whole area here, this is presence. This is where the human voice sits. So what I want to do with this bass here is I want to scoop out a little bit of space here, because that's not where the bass is living anyway. And that's going to move a little room out for all the other instruments to come through in these upper frequencies where they're supposed to be. And the bass can live down here below and have a little bit of presence up high, so you can still kind of hear it, but mainly feel it. Okay, so that's pretty good for now. Landed up around here, 700 hertz here to scoop out a nice little dip in the middle to get that bass to sit a little bit where it should sit. And I'm only taking out minus 2.8 decibels here, so we're just scooping out a little bit. And my Q is pretty tight here, pretty tight, 77, not super tight, but scooping out a healthy range of this mid-range where vocals and other instruments live. And that's actually making this a little bit more cluttered down here, so I'm going to see if this can handle me widening this just a smidge. But I'm losing a lot of presence when I'm widening this here, so I don't really actually want to do it too much. Be careful about it. Yeah, that's pretty tight there, and that'll work for now. Somewhere right there. And now because I've scooped out a little bit, I think I might just want to boost the overall volume just a smidge. And that sounds kind of nice to me. I can't really hear this well on my speakers. I'm doing this over headphones, so I'm mixing via headphones is very different. But anyway, this is the general idea of you take your sounds and you EQ them. Generally with real instruments, I'd put a compressor on here too, and we get those dynamics under control. But there aren't really any dynamics to get under control here because they're all synthesized instruments that all sound pretty good to begin with. So for the EQ, your general concept is you're going to remove what you don't want to make things sit where they should be. And then when you're boosting, the purpose of boosting is more to add EQ as an effect, because if you think about it, removing frequencies at specific places isn't altering the sound, it's kind of cleaning up the sound. But if you're boosting stuff, you're adding electricity, you're adding processing to those specific frequencies, and it becomes more of an effect kind of sound, which isn't a bad thing. But generally you want to remove to reveal good sounds and boost to accentuate and kind of spice up sounds and make EQ more of an effect. And so the way that I think about EQ is kind of what Michelangelo was quoted as saying about David. When he sculpted David, they said, how'd you make this great sculpture out of a block of stone or something along those lines? And he answered basically, David was in there the whole time, I just let him out. And so that's kind of the way to think about your sounds. There's the best possible sound for this waiting to be revealed in there, not be boosted into the right place. Okay, now to compare, I can uncheck this box where I have this RIA EQ plugin inserted after Surge, and I can play it without it. So that's disabled. I can check it and enable it and do an A/B test between no EQ and the EQ that I've set. And I do like what I've got going there. Comparing that a little bit, I want to come back to this third node that I've made and adjust this just slightly. And that's a little bit more like what I'm looking for right there. That'll work. And I think I'm actually fine with these drums now. I was thinking I'd come back and add a couple other hi-hats and some other percussive sounds, but with the little bit of reverb on there that I've put on there and wanted to keep this simple and flowing right along, I think what I have here are just the most bare bones drums you can get, kick, snare, and hat, and a taste of verb on there. Will suffice. And I kind of like the balance that I have for these drums overall. So what I'm going to show you is kind of what I hinted at earlier, is we're going to put these in a group. So I'm going to make a new track. I'm going to double click in here and I'll call this drum group, and I'll do it in all caps so I can kind of tell the difference. I'm going to click and drag that ahead or above all my drums. And then I'm going to click my first drum and then hold down Shift and click on my last drum. So all my drums are selected, and then I'm going to click and drag them up until that blue line shows an indentation like that, and then let it go. Okay, now those 4 tracks are indented in there. So those are all inside of that group now. So while I'm highlighted on this drum group, and since that's my drum main, I'm going to color that the same as all my other drums. So I'm going to right click, go track color, custom color, red. And actually I'll just go with the brighter, like the medium red. So now all of my drums, my kick, snare, and my hat, and remember, all 3 of those are subrouted to this drum verb, but all of them are being outputted now through this drum group. So as I play this drum group, if I just mute the drum group, it mutes all of the drums. And if I lower the volume on my drum group, it's going to lower the volume of that overall mix that I have of all those things routed into there. So now I can adjust the drum volume as one thing and keep the balance at the levels that I had set inside of there. And if I want to get rid of it and focus on something else, I can just easily mute the whole thing. Okay, so now I want to use groups again on these airy pads 1 and 2 that we made and panned slightly to the left and right. So I'm going to double click, I'm going to make a new track again. I'm going to click in here, I'm going to call this airy pad GRP for group, and all caps. That'll help me identify it as a group. I'm going to drag it up in front of these 2 guys. I'm going to right click it, change its color to blue like those 2. And then again, to put these tracks into this group that I've made, I'm going to select one, Shift to select the other one so they're both selected, and then click and drag until this blue line becomes indented under that one, and then let it go. And so now you can see there's kind of grayed out, but it shows you there's audio happening here. There's actually not any audio recorded on this track. There's no MIDI recorded on this track. There's nothing on this track. It's just where these two tracks are routed, they combine in here now. And so this grayed out portion shows you that. All right, now let me close this bass EQ. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so the reason that we've grouped these airy pads into their own group here is similar to the drums. I've already got them panned and have the volume balance between the two the way that I want them, so they kind of start to sit and feel more like one stereo instrument. And so that way I can control the volume of both of them overall without losing the balance that I've set between the two of them. And also because of something I want to do here, which is apply EQ to this, kind of like we did on the bass here. But when I apply EQ to this group, it's going to affect both of these tracks because both of these are routed through this one thing. So if I put an equalizer on here, that's going to affect the sound of both of these together. And that's what we want in this case, because all I'm going to do is kind of the opposite concept of the bass, but the same lines of thinking. We want these airy pads to sit where they should sit, kind of where they belong without taking up too much sonic space where other instruments go. So I'm going to put a high-pass filter on here with this first node. So just like the bass, I wanted that low isolated, and I wanted to clear some of the high treble frequencies out, so I put a low pass filter on there. So it only allows the lower frequencies to pass at whatever cutoff we set it. This is the opposite of that. This is a high pass filter, and it's only going to allow frequencies above the cutoff that we set to come through. So I'm going to start it all the way down at the bottom of the range. And I'm just going to listen to my pad, those airy pads together. I'm going to slowly move my high pass filter up until it sounds like it's getting out of the way of the kick drum and the real low end of the bass, without losing too much of its guts, too much of its presence down here, its warmth. So when you have a high pass, low pass like this bandwidth isn't a Q, it's not a curve, it's the angle. So we'll adjust this and maybe smooth this out a little. Okay, and then likewise, we're a bit heavy in the middle here, in where we're real sensitive to these frequencies. I'm gonna maybe scoop out a little bit in the middle here, so these sound a little bit more spacious and not so much just right in your face in the middle. They sound a little bit more wide, a little big. Feels like they open up kind of right around here. So I'm finding I like how a little bit lower feels actually right around here. 650 hertz right around there is kind of feeling nice and getting things out of the way, giving some spaciousness. So I actually want to widen this a little bit. Not too much, just pushing it back too far. So I want to keep that pretty tight. Maybe play with taking this out a bit more, maybe less. Okay. No, actually, I like how that feels right there, right around -4, -4.2 decibels at about 647 hertz with a really tight Q. And I'll kind of leave that. But I've given that actually a little bit more presence there by placing it in its own space. So here's where our group comes in. I want to turn down the volume of all of them, or both of them. So I'm just going to grab my group volume instead of the individual pads and bring that down just a tad. Just less than a dB, just about half a dB down, decibel down from where it was. And again, that's just to make it sound good on headphones while I'm doing this. I'll do a check on the actual monitors later because it sounds totally different when it's actually pushing air instead of being just pumped right into your ears. All right, so now let me come back and fill in some more icons here just for fun and for ease of looking at. So for my drum group, I'm going to use this whole drum kit icon that Reaper gives you. Drum verb, I think I'll leave alone for now. Bass, I'm going to bring up icons again, find a bass, and that'll work. Even though it's not a real bass, you know, it's a synth, but I can tell that's a bass. And then for the airy pad group, I think I'll just use that same keyboard icon again. Oops, not colors, icons. All right, and then Control S to save our progress so far. And we still haven't recorded any audio, and I don't think we're going to on this because we're just making a quick beat with these plugins the fastest way possible. Now that I got a little bit more fleshed out here, let's try adjusting this to 93 BPM again. I just want to hear how it feels now. $95. 94. 90? Kind of like that almost. Let me take it down a little further to 88. 88 miles per hour. No, that's a bit laggy. I think I just go back to 92. All right, so we got our drums, we got our bass, we got these kind of stereo synth pad things taking up some middle room. And now I want to throw something on the high end, actually, so I'm going to double click, make a new track. Let me go ahead while I'm here, change my input to MIDI, Oxygen Pro, which is my device, all channels. And then I'll hit FX and clear out my last search term, filter down to instruments here on the side again. Let me go back to Dext again. Dext might be better on the higher end of the sound spectrum here. Let me record arm this. Alright, so I'm going to play around in here. Okay, I like this kind of dreamy music box kind of sound. So I'm going to do something with that. So I'm just going to call this, it sounds like a music box to me, so I'm going to call it music box. And I'm going to right click on it. It feels like it wants to be orange. Okay, so I still got my 2-bar selection up here in my timeline, and I am highlighted in the music box track. So all I got to do is hit W to go back to start, and then I can go insert new MIDI item. There's my new MIDI item. I'll double click in there, and I think I want to be kind of around here, you know, because our main, I don't really want all that, but you know, our main pads were down here, our bass is down here. This guy wants to kind of put a little icing on the cake of that up on the higher end, you know, fill that end of the spectrum out with a little bit of something going on in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is come back to the start, and I'm still on loop playback. I still got my time selection, so I'm just gonna let it play for a while and work out a little part. Okay, so I think I got a part worked out. I was playing around with this, so I'm working on this thing. So I'm going to keep drawing this. Okay, so I think I got a little melody framed out here. You can see down here, changed my grid to 1/8 notes because this is a pretty sparse melody, so these wide or longer held notes were fine. And here's what I got. So all that's happening here is an arpeggio of the chord that we're on. Nothing fancy there. So the first chord is the E minor. What's happening here is it goes E, B, G, back to E. So it's just an arpeggio. The melody, sort of melody that this is playing is just an arpeggio that's using the notes of the chord that we're on. So we're on an E minor, and then we go to the C. So here it goes from here down to the C and the G still, which now is the 1 and the 5 of the C chord we're on. And that continues on. We keep this exact same rhythm on the second time here, and we're still outlining the A minor chord, except we're starting on the 3rd again. We got this first inversion happening again, so that this doesn't feel too jumpy from this section to this section. So we're doing, the A is up here, and the E, the 5 of that chord is right there. And then that just repeats again. And so again, those are just the notes of the A minor chord that we're on. And then it goes to the B, the 5 chord. And so this goes down to B. And then the F sharp, which is the fifth of the B minor chord that we're on. And that F sharp resolves back up to the G, which in our case is the 3rd that exists within the actual relative minor that we're working in, the E minor, and then it starts all over again. So we've got a rhythm, we've plucked out some sort of little pattern with it, but we're just using notes from the chords we're on, and you can see we've kind of strategically left little gaps here because this is where the bass does its little turnaround melodic thingies. So these guys come in here, but then they're going to shut up right there when the bass is going to do a little bit more of its thing. Because they're not doing anything other than arpeggios up here either. So they're just going to shut up for a second and let the bass do those little turnarounds there at the end of each 2-bar thing. And that bass part similarly is just framing out the notes of the chords that it's on and occasionally doing these little melodic turnarounds at the end, but the notes that it's going to are still taken from the scale that we're in, the E natural minor scale. But those are way too loud now, so I like those how they are. I'm going to Control S to save that. I'm going to unarm that because I'm not going to play on that anymore. I'm going to take this volume knob, I'm going to turn it all the way down, and then I'm going to play, and I'm just going to mix it in, and it's going to be faint more in the back of the mix. And it calls a little bit too much attention to itself sitting in the middle. So I'm going to pan it to a certain side, and because I have this high string, more violin string kind of sound that's panned slightly right, that higher end of the spectrum is kind of already occupied more by this guy than by this other synthy thing that we had earlier. So I'm going to pan it over, and he's going to share some space on that side, but we're going to pan this farther so he's really not in his way. And I like how that is just way back there sitting on top of the chords. Okay, so once I got that, I'm going to add just one more track now. Double click. And I'm not sure what I'm going to call this yet or what I'm going to put on it actually. But what it's going to do is it's going to be kind of another higher part, sort of like this music box. And it's going to pan off to the other side to oppose this thing and fill up a little bit of that top end sometimes and fill out the sonic spectrum a little bit more. Because we've already got drums, we've already got some rhythm happening, we've got the bass, so we've got low end, we've got our pads, so we've got mid-rangey and warmth kind of. If I were putting a lot more time into this, I'd probably layer more synths in there, but we're just rushing through this here. So I just want one more high sound up here, and because this thing is doing kind of like a little rhythmic boppity sort of thing, I'm going to oppose that with something that's a little more of a long-held kind of thing on this side. So I'm going to bring up my effects over here, and I'm going to go back to my instruments, and for this one I'm going to go with Spitfire Labs, which is one of those things, like I talked about, that's a bit more complex where you have to download its own program and then download these sounds, and then it runs those sounds inside of the program as a plugin inside of your DAW. Alright, so I want some kind of synth thing, I think here. I'm going to filter down to this. I'm going to play around in here till I find something. Alright, so I got to go set my audio to input MIDI, Oxygen Pro, all channels. Then I've got to arm that to record. And then my keyboard will work. And then I can go searching through some sounds. Alright, so I like this classic strings sound and the sustain it's already got on it. So I'm gonna go with this. And again, I'm not even going to tweak the preset sound at all. I'm just going to roll with that. So I'm going to click inside of this thing, click W, go back to the start. Got my time selection in there. I'm going to insert a MIDI item. Now that I know what this is, I'm going to click in here and I'm going to name this high strings. And then I can click in my MIDI item and start to work out a part in here. So the music box is kind of up here, airy pads, being all warm down here, so I want a little bit of space in here that nobody else is occupying. So I think this guy wants to come in and say just a little something right here in this part of the range. So I'll work out something there and just let this thing go on loop, poke around till I got something I like. All right. So I think I got a part here. I'm going to open up my MIDI item, and I'm not even going to bother trying to record it and play along with it. I'm just going to draw my notes. So I'll work on this for a while. All right, so I think I got my string part worked out here. These are a little bit loud on the attack here. Their attack's a bit high, so I'm going to highlight these pinheads and bring down the velocity so that these hit a little softer. There we go. So something kind of long and held out that opposes the music box on the other side. We're gonna pan it later. So again, something like about as simple as it gets musically. What we're doing here is all just coming straight out of the chord that we are on. So we're on an E minor chord. That's our 1 chord that we start on. And so the strings are just playing the 3 and the 5 of that chord. We're just taking out the 1. Because on the strings, we don't want to have, at least in this case, I don't want to have the root in there because it feels a little bit more bold, a little more classical or cinematic. And by removing the 1, by removing the root and just having the 3rd and the 5th, it gives it a little bit more of a floaty, cloudy on top kind of feeling to it. And then it's just going to keep climbing because the rest of it can kind of have more like a descending feel to it. So this is going to oppose that motion and try to give it a little more complexity to the feel of the musical motion there. We kind of got a descending sort of chord feel, and the strings continue to climb. And that also allows us to have a very simple motion as we change through those chords, because our next chord here is the C. And so all we do is we're going from the G and the B on the 1 chord, and we're going to hang on the G because on the next chord, the C chord, that G is the 5th. That's the 5 of C. So again, just another note from the chord. And then on top, we've just gone up a half step. The B just moved up a half step to the C, the root of the new chord that we're on. So the bottom note just stayed the same, and the top note just moved up a half step. And that's very much how string parts usually go. That kind of careful motion and very near motion, kind of like that. Usually not huge jumps unless it's very, very intentional when you do that, because it calls attention to itself, as opposed to providing this kind of background ambiance kind of thing. So our next chord is the A minor, and so here we're doing the same thing. So like before, where this bottom note stayed the same because it was in both chords, and then this other note only had to move a half step to go from being what was it? The 5th of the first chord to the root of the next chord. So now this chord this note on top, this C, it gets to stay where it's at, and it's the bottom one that has to move, because this note on top here, the C, is now the 3rd above the A chord that we're on. We're on an A minor, which has an A, C, and E in it. So we're just playing the A and C here. So the top note stayed the same, and the bottom note just had to move from G a whole step up to A. So again, short motion here and making for that background ambiance kind of thing. And then last, as we get to our dominant chord, we are going to make a jump there because that'll kind of prepare us to jump back into this more soothing repetition starting from 1 all over again. So these guys are just going to move up to frame out our B minor chord, our 5 chord. This guy's going to take the root, the B note, and this guy's going to take the 3rd, the D note. So it's the same thing that was happening down here. Our A minor just had the 1 and the 3 of the chord. Now we're on a B minor, and we just moved everything up. We're still on the 1 and the 3 of the chord. A to C to B to D. I'm going to save, click Control and S to save. Now these high strings, they feel like they want to be yellow. So I'm going to right click and go track color, set track to custom color. I'm going to pick yellow. And I don't need this armed anymore. I'm going to pan this. Just let me bring this down, bring the volume down a little bit. And then pan it off to the right to oppose that music box on the left, and to kind of blend in with that airy pad that we've already got there that's already stringy-like, which seems like it might kind of clutter that up over there since we already have some string pad thing happening there. But it's a little bit lower in there, and this will add kind of like another layer on top of it that will add interest to the song, because this will go away. We're pretty much going to keep this because this is the synths that are down lower, the pads, the airy pads are kind of more the backbone of the song. And this high part of the song, we could bring that in more in where a chorus would go. So it's not going to be happening all the time. And that coming and going will add interest on top of this more repetitive stuff down below. All right, so this thing feels like it balances okay, right around 43% to the right there. So I'll leave it there. But the volume, it's still pretty hot. So I'm going to drag the volume all the way down till it's gone. And then start the track over and mix it back in from nothing. Because I just want them barely there, just like that music box. And then I think my whole drum group here, I want to drag down just maybe a decibel or so. Not quite. Maybe half a dB-ish, somewhere around there. That feels a little bit better. That snare's a bit hot, so I'm going to pull this snare down inside of this group. You know, I can still adjust these individual groups, these individual tracks inside of the group. Pull this down. There we go. I don't want that snare to be too aggressive in there, especially since it's already kind of a little up-tempo-ish. It's got kind of a groove to it, you know, it's not totally just laid back and blah. Okay, now like that, I think those high strings are a bit too prominent. So I'm going to pull them back about a dB. There we go. I'm going to tuck them back right behind the music box. Just a shade, just like a step or two behind them on stage, kind of. Okay, so I think this is pretty much it. Again, if I was doing a real song where had lyrics and vocals and everything, there'd be a lot more going on, and we'd put a lot more work into adding effects like we did with this drum verb. We'd be putting probably a lot more EQ on things to really get things dialed into a specific place. Probably throw some compressors on some things to get control of the dynamic range a little bit more, even though these all don't really need that much help. So what I'm going to do next is just apply a little bit of treatment to the master track. So now, let me stop this. I'm going to go back to the start. Control S to save this. And now I want that mixer back. So I'm going to go View, Mixer. I'm going to bring this guy back. And I'm going to drag this part of it up quite a bit. And then up here in my track window, I'm going to shrink these down because I don't need to see these that big anymore. And now I just want to hear this whole thing in a loop, and I'm going to treat all of this audio as one through my master track over here. Let me cut that out. Click on that red thing to get rid of the last time it clipped. There it goes. So usually that clipping there when your audio isn't too hot but it clips like that, is because you're starting it in the middle of a waveform when the waveform isn't at 0 and it makes this glitch. Okay, so I have this thing on here called Restream. You won't need Restream. You won't need this. This is what I have to use. This is if you're gonna get the audio out of your DAW into a live streaming thing or a video recording thing like I'm doing here, then you have to use this thing called Restream. And Restream is going to send your main audio output out through this Restream path, and then in your whatever thing you're using, you're going to bring the audio in through that. So you won't need this Restream thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add just a compressor. So I'm going to search COMP, short for compressor. Oh, and I need to be back on all plugins. And I'm going to use Reacomp, just Reaper's built-in compressor. I'm going to just throw, because we're messing with the whole master track of like everything combined down to just your stereo left and right, main, final track kind of thing. We're not going to do anything too drastic because it affects the overall sound very much. So you can come in here and they have presets. You can pick these and then mess with them from there. I'm not even going to pick one of those. I'm just going to let this guy go. And it's not really doing anything yet. If it was, you'd see red here where it was actually reducing the sound. So what the compressor is going to do is it's going to get your dynamic range or your volume differences under control. So if you think about like when you're watching an action movie and there's like quiet parts where you have to turn it up really loud to hear like important parts of the plot that people are whispering and stuff, and then like some shooting part starts on the next action scene or something and it's really loud and you have to turn it back down again. What you're doing with the remote control there is basically what you're making a compressor do automatically for you. Except what the compressor can do is make adjustments much quicker than your human hand can, and it can make them more precisely than you can also to very specific parameters that you set in here. The threshold over here, this is kind of the main amount of compression we're going to apply, and any volume that cuts above the threshold will be reduced, right? It's going to be compressed. So the lower down that we set our threshold, the more our audio is probably going to jump above that threshold and be affected by compression, and it's going to have the sound slightly changed of it, and the dynamics are going to be smoothed out a little bit. But if you apply too much, it squashes the sound and makes it sound odd. So we're going to leave pre-compression at 0, attack at 3 is probably, actually no, I'm going to bump this up to about 9 milliseconds. I'm just going to let just the tiniest little blip through there before the compressor kicks in, because we're going to apply something later to catch that. So I'm going to go around 9 here. And the release, I'm going to give a long release, which is, to me, long release for something like this would be around 200, 250 milliseconds. And now the ratio, right here it says 1:1. So 1:1 isn't applying, a 1:1 ratio isn't applying any compression. What you're saying here is that when the volume goes above my threshold, compress it by a ratio of what? If it's 1:1, it's not compressing it at all. If you crank it all the way up to where it says infinite, then it becomes what's called a limiter, which means that any sound that goes above the threshold isn't just going to be reduced by a ratio, it's going to be reduced down to the threshold, and that's going to limit it. So compressor with infinite ratio becomes a limiter. It's going to limit it right at that threshold, not allow it to go above there by any ratio at all. And that's what you want on final stereo mixes to get maximum volume, and that's how people get recordings on the radio and television to be kind of loud and jump out of the speakers. And then the knee down here, I'm not really going to mess with this knee. I might adjust it to maybe like 0.08, something like that, or 0.8 decibels. And the knee just smooths out how this affects it. So with your knee set at 0, as soon as sound goes above that threshold, it's going to pull it down exactly by your ratio instantly. The knee will kind of smooth that out a little bit more if you want compression applied a little bit more subtly. You don't want to hear compression happening. You want it a little more subtle. And then this other stuff I'm going to leave alone. The low pass is 200K, the high pass is 0, which means it's letting all the sound spectrum through, and RMS will leave that alone. So I've got my ratio here. I'm going to set this down to about like 6. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of glue everything together and smooth out the sound and kind of reduce the depth of everything, but in a good way. If you do it too much, then it makes everything feel like it's on the same sonic plane coming at you. But with no compression, things can be just a little bit too deep in terms of volume differences and spacing differences as far apart as they feel and sound. So this attack, I'm going to leave it like 9. This release around 250 is good. Ratio around 6-ish. Knee about there. Now I'm just going to lower this threshold until I hear the compressor start to kick in. And when the compressor starts to kick in, you'll hear it, and you can also see it here because it'll show you exactly how much it's reducing it by whenever it goes above that threshold. So you can see it's kind of taming the drums a little bit and allowing the instruments to cut through a little bit more. But it's a bit much now. You can kind of hear it pumping between you hear the compressor kind of pumping between when the beat happens and it pulls it down and then lets it go again. And if you can get that timed out, like you can adjust this to where it fits right in with the rhythm of it, so it's kind of like an effect. But I don't want that here. I just want to bring this back up and apply just the tiniest amount of compression to this, just the tiniest little bit to smooth it out just a tad. I like that. So then this little checkbox right here, I can uncheck that, and that'll bypass it. and I can just kind of A/B test it. Okay, so I kind of like that. You can see there's just barely a tiny amount of red showing up, so the compressor's just barely doing anything. But it's smoothing out the drums just a little bit how I like. Still letting a tiny bit go through on this really short attack. It's bringing all the instruments out a little bit more and smoothing them all together a little bit more. But not so much that they all kind of lose their own space. So now, I kind of like that. So I'm going to go back to my effects chain on this master track, and even though I've got a compressor on here, now I'm going to put a limiter after this. Like I said, a compressor turned up all the way, or a compressor with the ratio turned up all the way, I should say, is just a limiter. And I like this plugin here, this JS Master limiter, because what we're doing here is mastering. We're applying changes to the overall master, all of the tracks together. And this thing just puts a nice glue and a boost on things that I really like. And also, just like with our compressor before, we're affecting the main track, so we're going to try to be pretty subtle and tasteful here. We don't want it to sound like we're squashing it or making it sound bad or weird. We just want to kind of bring it to life a little bit more. And get it close, get it hot, get it close to as loud as it can go without pushing it over the edge and clipping. And now that I've got that, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to double click in my effects again, and I'm going to clear out my search. I'm going to search now for EQ, and I'm going to throw an equalizer on here. I'm going to put another EQ on here. Again, just making a little bit more space in the middle there, make it feel a little bit bigger, a little bit louder, and to leave a little bit of a hole for the vocal to come in, where we're going to do the voiceover later for the YouTube video. But that's the beat for now. So I've got that. That's pretty hot. The levels are looking okay there. Now I'm just going to arrange the song structure, right? Because now this is just like a 4-bar monotonous thing that goes on forever. So if I just loop this for 5 minutes, that's not going to be very interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and drag and select all these things. And because all these things are already locked in this 4-bar pattern, I can just duplicate them. So I'm going to escape to get rid of this time selection that I have up here. I still got these highlighted. So I'm going to Control D and duplicate and see if that works. Nice. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and select all of that. And I'm going to Control D and duplicate that. There we go. And you can kind of see where this is going. I'm going to right click and select all of that and duplicate all of that. And then I'm going to shrink down my view over here with these plus and minus signs, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to keep stretching this thing out. And below your bar numbers here, you can see the actual time. And so this thing, it says I'm about at 2:40, about 2 minutes and 40 seconds right here. And I already know that the video is not going to be probably longer than that or even that long. So this is probably going to be the extent of the beat here that will serve as the background track, and it'll probably fade out a while before this. The video will end and this audio will fade out. So where I've stopped here is at the beginning of 65, it says up here. So what this is a 64-bar track. So I'm going to hit escape to undo my time selection, and I'm going to start to arrange this thing. And so I know right off the bat I don't want the music box and the high strings to be going all the time. They're more of a chorusy thing. And let me just play the beat with everything. And I don't think I want those going, I don't want it to feel like it's starting on the chorus, so to speak. So I want those to introduce themselves later and have this to start a little more chill. Now what if I take out this hi-hat and the bass? I like that. Okay, so for this first section here, our first 4 bars, I deleted the hi-hat and the bass that was there, as well as the music box and strings. I'm going to delete more of these music box and strings because they're not going to come in yet either. So I think I will, let's see what happens if I start right here, pick up to this next bar, and if I let the hi-hat and bass come back in. Maybe if just the bass comes in and we keep the hi-hat out for another 4 bars, and likewise take the music box and high strings out for another 4 bars, and take that from the top. And then just the hi-hat. There we go. You know what, maybe the music box and strings should have started back here with this hi-hat. So let me try that. I'm going to select one and I'm going to control click, or shift click I could do because they're next to each other. There's nothing else in the way. And once I have those selected, I can control C to copy. I can click this timeline marker back at the beginning of where that should start and click inside of the top one there and paste, control V, and there it plunks them right in there. So let's see how this sounds from the top again. Yeah, I think I like that. And we'll let that go as like an 8-bar intro to a kind of chorus section that's happening now that'll also be 8 bars, and then we'll take it back down. Okay, so now we'll take out the music box and the high strings for a while. So I'm just going to control click these sections. And I think I'll take out 4 and just make it this whole 16-bar section without these guys. Let's see how that works. Maybe I'll let the music box just say hello one time right there. Because this has already repeated the exact same thing twice, now we're going to repeat this exact same thing a 3rd time. I'll throw one little change in there so it's something different. And then back to essentially the chorus. And we'll just let that go for another 8 bars, and then well, just to carve it out, actually, I could do markers. Actually, I'll show you markers. Right at the beginning of this 9th bar, I'm going to call this the so-called chorus. So I'm just push M on the keyboard, and it's going to put a number 1 there, and that's my marker. And then I can just click that thing, and it'll jump there. And I can double click it and name it, and I'll call it CH1, chorus 1. And so then this next section where things go away, I'll click on there and give an M, hit M right there, and I can double click that, and I'll call that verse 1. So our beginning section here is just the intro, then the intro goes into the chorus, then that goes into this first verse, or V1, what I'm calling this here. That's a 16-bar section. The chorus is just an 8-bar section. So our verse ends here at our next chorus. Hit M, and put another marker there, and we'll call that CH2, the second chorus, which again is going to be an 8-bar pattern. So after 8 bars, throw another marker right there, and that will be our, double click that, that will be V2, or verse 2. And that's going to go for 16 bars, and then we'll do a chorus and probably fade out during this chorus, if not sooner. So I'll hit M right there, and that will be the last chorus, chorus 3, and our fade out chorus. And these guys, I probably don't want to get rid of all those again, but maybe I can start this second verse the same way I started the first one. Except, what if this time I did it like that? So I did the same thing, except that last time through we didn't do the same thing and go empty again. We let the strings say hello one time. And let me try that out at the end of this, from the end of this second chorus. think that'll work. If this was a song with vocals, like something a listener's actually supposed to really pay attention to and give their undivided attention to, then there'd be a lot more going on here. This is still pretty boring, but this is just going to serve as faint background music again, so this will work. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mute my microphone so that I can take off my headphones and turn up my monitors and get my balance, my mix, my volume set there. Okay, so I'm noticing that I made some adjustments. I'm noticing on the kick drum, the slap, like the high-end pop slap part of the kick, not the low-end thump of it, but the higher part of it, is a bit too much. You want that because it's what gives the presence to the kick drum when it slaps. But too much of it can make it sound a little bit harsh or annoying or call a bit too much attention to itself. So I'm going to throw a low-pass filter on this guy. Actually, I need to go to the 4th note up here, and I'm going to throw a low-pass. And I'm going to sweep this up to the top of the range and just kind of scoop it down. I think I might like that. That's a little bit more pillowy, pillowy, like you're smacking a pillow. And usually I don't want that, but in this case, I do kind of want that to tame this. And it's kind of a mellow beat anyway, so I just want a little bit of that slap to let you know when the kick's happening, if you can't feel the low end on whatever you're listening with. While I'm in here, actually, I think I'm going to take a lot of mid out of this. Use this middle node here, sweep around here. Tighten this up. Tighten up that Q. Make this kick a little bit bigger. Actually, that might just be fine right there. Pull it down a little bit more. Okay, so I kind of like that a little bit better. It's got the low pass there, taking a little bit of that top end harshness off, and I scooped out a little high mid here to give it a little bit more size. A little bit less presence. Alright, so I think I'm just about done. What I'm going to do is bring this up on the main monitors again, get some final levels adjusted, and then we'll do the render, the export. I think I got my mix how I want it here. Well, let me hit Control S to save. So I'm calling this done because it's just a quick and dirty job here again. So I'm ready to render this now. I'm ready to render my final output here, which is going to be our final audio track, like a normal audio file, a normal stereo audio file of a song. So what we're going to do is highlight our time selection. And I'm not even going to bother to put a fade out in here. I'm just going to sort of let it die. Actually, let me hit escape to clear this time selection. And I'll leave a little bit of space at the end for the instruments and reverb and stuff to kind of tail off. And I can click this where it becomes this arrow and stretch this time selection back to the start, all the way to the start. I'm not even going to put a fade out on these instruments or anything like that. What you could do if you wanted to is go to any of these tracks and highlight them and push V, bring up the volume, and then you can click in here and draw volume changes that you want to have happen, so you don't have to do it by hand. You just draw your automation. So that brings up your automation. And to hide the volume automation, hit V again. And what you can also do is go view master track, and that will show your master track like we've been seeing it over here in the mix window. That'll show your master track in here, and you can highlight that and push V. And if I wanted to, I can drag. Actually, I'll just go ahead and show you that here. We'll do it. Come in here and I'll hit Shift, and that gives me this pointer. And so I'm going to draw a node right there, and then draw another node right there. And I'm going to click and select that second node and drag it down. That's going to, that's not what I want. Control Z to undo. Oh, I need to get out of this time selection. That's right. I'm going to hit escape to get out of there. Okay, so I'm going to draw some nodes in here. And I need to get just this node selected because I'm going to drag this all the way down. And this other node that I drew, I don't need him here. So I'm going to hold Alt, and it's going to make that X. And if I hold Alt and click, well, it's that X, it'll get rid of that node. So now I've just drawn a little fade out here at the end. That's automation that we wrote that's being applied to our master track, so it's affecting the whole mix. So to render this whole thing, I'm going to go File, Render. And what I want this to do is, let me close this actually. I need to come back here, close that. I need to come back here and make my time selection again. And I'm going to have it end just a little bit after where everything stops. And I've got my fade out. So I'll go back to File, Render, and Source Master Mix, yes. Then under Bounds, you can select the entire project or a time selection. And then directory, set where I want that to go. Set the folder I want that and the file name of this mix down. And I'm going to leave it at 44.1 sample rate. stereo, full speed offline. I'm going to leave all this stuff, 192 point, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to leave it as a format of a WAV file. The WAV file will be the lossless file, and I'm going to take that. There's other ways you can export it, but usually what I like to do is just export the WAV file, the uncompressed pure sound file from Reaper here. And the downside of the WAV file is you can't really upload that easily to places like YouTube and stuff because it's such a huge file. It has no compression. So what I do is I get the WAV file out of Reaper, the actual audio uncompressed, compressed in terms of size, not in terms of dynamics like we were talking before. And then I'm going to take my WAV file and I'm going to convert that to an MP3 or an MP4 or whatever other kind of file that I'm going to use using a separate program. And I'll show you that. So I'm going to leave this as a WAV file, and all the rest of this stuff is fine. And so now I'm ready. So I'll hit render one file. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to click this button here that says show in Explorer. And there it is. There's my WAV file inside of my Reaper project file that I had set up for this project. There's my main project RPP file, and I told it to go here. I didn't want it in with my project media file folder. Your project media file folder is where like actual audio recordings and things like that will end up, and I didn't want that mixed up in there just out of habit. I want that in my main directory here with my project. So I can double click that, and that's going to launch in a program I have called VLC Player, which is what I use as my media player instead of like whatever comes default, Windows Media Player or whatever. So you should download and install a program called VLC Player. It's the best video player and audio player, and it also comes with a bunch of other stuff that will make it so that you can do video in Reaper later on if you want to, without having to get too much extra stuff. So I'm gonna listen to this in VLC now. So now we're listening to this in VLC Player as the actual mixed and mastered stereo 2-track. And it's not great, but it'll work for now, and it'll definitely suffice for my background purposes in a short YouTube video. So this is fine. And the last thing I need to do is make this smaller because it's pretty big. It's 43 megabytes, as you can see, or 43,000 K. So I'm going to use a program that makes this pretty easy to take my WAV file and just turn it into anything. And that's this program called Any Video Converter, or AVC. And Any Video Converter, you can go download that for free and install that. And you can use it to convert things to just audio files too. It doesn't have to be a video file. So I'm going to drag and drop this thing into my to be converted workflow in here. This is Any Video Converter. And I'm going to set what I'm going to convert this to. I'm going to select this little music note icon thing here. And I'm going to choose MP3 audio. Okay. And then it's going to show me the details here, where it's going to output to. It's going to output to videos, Any Video Converter, and MP3 folder. That's fine. We'll go find that when it's done. It's already got the name. It's 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Quality, normal. We'll leave that alone. Then audio options. I'm going to click this thing down here. MP3, 128 bit rate, 44 1K. Audio channels is 2 for stereo, left and right. Click this gear and see what that is. Customize audio bit rate. Now I'll close that. I'll pick from the drop down here. 128 is a bit low. A good compromise that I like between sound quality and file size is 192. 128 is a bit low on the sound quality for my tastes sometimes. I'm going to go with 192 in this case. So it'll make a slightly larger file size, but a little bit better audio quality. So I got that ready to go. I got all my settings how I want, and now we can hit convert now. All right, so that's done converting, and then the folder pops up here. Back in Any Video Converter, it gives you this ad to go buy stuff. You can just close this. It's done converting. And we'll go back to that folder where it put that MP3, and now we can listen to our compressed MP3. Now let's take that, we'll pause that inside of VLC Player here. I'm going to go back and grab our original uncompressed WAV file and drag that in there. We can compare these two. Okay, I'm not sure how good you can hear, but I can hear it in my headphones that the WAV file sounds a little bit clearer, it's just a little bit better sound quality overall. The MP3 sounds a little bit more like an MP3. But that'll work. So let's go here. If I go to, well, it's not showing me. If I right click on this thing and go to properties, how big is this? 3.84. Okay, so our original WAV file was 43 megabytes, and we've shrunk that down from 43 down to about 4. From 43 down to 4. So that's a huge savings in file size, and hopefully loading time when people go to watch this on the internet, like on YouTube or anything like that, if that's where you're going to put that. So it's a huge reduction in file size for a relatively small loss in audio quality, especially when you consider people are going to be listening to this. If you're uploading this, people are going to be listening to this on their phones and in their cars with the windows down and wind going by or the air conditioner on, all sorts of other noise, and they're not really probably going to be able to appreciate that subtle loss in quality anyway. So there we have it. We cooked up a beat from scratch in the Reaper kitchen. I'm going to go ahead and close this and hit Control S to save our project here. And then we've got our final MP3. And so then I can do whatever I want to this. I can, when I go to make my video and use this as the background music, I'll use the WAV file. But if I wanted to use this and just upload this beat to YouTube and say, hey, check it out, or upload it to, or send it to a friend through the phone or something like that, this MP3 file is what I'd use. So now one last thing that you can do here is, because we kind of put a lot of work into setting all this up and making it all pretty and everything. So what I'll do is I'm going to view and I'm going to uncheck mixer. You can see we got all this stuff. So I'm going to Control S to save, and this is my project, my final song for this little beat that we made here. So what I can do now is I'm going to clear this out and make a template out of it. So I'm going to hit Escape and get rid of my time selection. I'm going to right click and remove all of these markers, and I'm going to right click and drag and remove our little, select those and hit Delete to remove that fade that we put on there, and Escape to get rid of this time selection again. And then I'm going to right click and drag, and I'm going to select all of our music, the actual music that we put in here, and I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to hit Escape to get back to the beginning of my time selection. And I think I'll leave that alone. Oh, I'll come back to Master, and I'll hit V to get rid of the volume automation. I could add some more icons here, but you get the idea of what I'm doing here. So I've got this down to a template. So if I wanted to, I could save this. I go to File, Project Templates, Save Project as Template. I could call this Beat Template 1 or something like that, and save that now. So I've got my original music file all saved, and now I've cleared out everything and saved this as something else. So the original is still preserved, and this is something else now. So if I close this, say Close Project, and don't save over your original project, and we go back to nothing, and then I go File, Project Templates, then my Beat Template 1 shows up right there. So if next time I open Reaper, I can come down to Project Templates and come back down to my Beat Template 1. Then here I've got that just as I left it. So I've got these tracks laid out here. I've got them color coded. I've got the icons for them. And if I expand them out again across our Y axis here, you can see like my bass, for example, it's still got that plugin on there. You still got the plugin, and it's got that little cleaned up EQ that I put on there, but it's just got no musical part. So I could use this as a template to make my next beat and go in here and maybe choose some different drum presets or some different VSTs, but still you're going to have this same similar structure probably. You're going to have drums, you're going to have bass, you're going to have some chord, some keys or guitars or something that's carrying the chords, and then some little melodic things that are happening around that usually. So you can set up the template and just work from there, and you can set up different templates for what kind of music you're making and that have different VSTs on them. You can set up like a hip-hop beat making template, you can set up a dance music template and all other kind of stuff like that with plugins that you usually go to for that type of thing. Or if you get into video, you can set up separate video templates and have just all kinds of templates for it if you want, so you're not having to start from scratch every time. So this has gone on for quite a while. I should probably wrap this up, and I'm really hot because I've had the fan and the air conditioner off to not have them humming over the microphone here. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. Good luck.